Hail and well met, Loremasters, and welcome back to Classical Chinese for Beginners. Last episode, we learned about the famous Eastern Han wonder children Huang Xiang and Kong Rong, and their remarkable examples of filial piety and brotherly duty. We also went over a few grammar points, nang, can or mighty, yu, at, to, toward, than, dang, ought to, should, will, shall, and finally, xian and hou, before and after. Oh, that's right, I almost forgot. I gave you all some homework last time, didn't I? So let's have a look. Now, the ones I've seen were all pretty good. Everyone has grasped the gist of the text. If we take a look at these four oversettings of the lines 详就灵能温习孝与亲所当执, we can see that some of you went with a more straightforward bare bones oversetting, while others wanted to add more context that, for a Chinese reader, would be understood but which might be needed for an English reader to make sense of the story. Translating classical Chinese is a little bit like particle physics. When you measure a particle, you can either accurately measure the speed or the location of the particle, but you can't accurately measure both at the same time. So there will always be a little bit of a give and take with how you choose to overset a certain line, and what you choose to put the weight on. And now for a few questions. Is there a difference between ke and nang? Because I've had a hard time telling the difference between the two. We haven't covered ke yet in this series, but let's quickly go over these two. Both nang and ke can be overset as can or may in English. The difference in broad strokes is sort of like the difference between the English can and may, as in can I go to the bathroom versus may I go to the bathroom. Neng is a noun and a verb. The basic meaning is might or ability, as in you can do something because you have the power or capability to do so. Ke is a verb, an adverb, and a stative verb, the basic meaning of which is to allow or to permit, and so the focus here is on something that can be done because it is allowed to be done. The stative verb meaning is good, right, or fitting. If something is allowed, then it is, by extension, good and fitting. Next frame. Where did the quote about Rong come from? It seems interesting. The earliest biography on Kong Rong is probably the one in the later book of Han, Hou Han Shu, under the biographies of Zheng Kong and Xun Yu, which you can find on the Chinese Text Project. Link in the description. This biography doesn't contain the story about the pairs, however, which comes from Kong Rong Jia Zhuan, the Kong Rong family biography. Sadly, I couldn't find that one online, but if anyone has a clue where to find a digital copy of it, please share with the rest of the class. Also, and lastly, someone said they wanted to overset T as fraternal piety to mirror filial piety, I venture. I've never seen this translation before, but as for me, yeah, I like it, go for it. Today, we'll be learning 3 new Chinese cultural concepts, the 3 skills, san cai, the 3 lights, sang guang, and the 3 key links, sang gang. Along the way, we'll expand our word hoard with numbers, ordinal terms, and more key name and deed words oft seen in classical Chinese texts. So wet your brushes and let's dive right into today's text. Shou, xiao, ti, ci, jian, wen, zhi, mou, shu, shi, mou, wen, yi, er, shi, shi, er, bo, bo, er, qian, qian, er, wan, san, cai, zhe, tian, di, ren, san, guang, zhe, ri, yue, xing, san, gang, zhe, jun, chen, yi, fu, zi, qin, fu, fu, shun, 手孝悌，次见闻，知某数，识某文，一而十，十而博，博而千，千而万，三才者，天地人，三光者，日月星，三纲者，君臣义，父子亲，夫妇顺。手 head first. A drawing of a head seen from the side. Nowadays it kinda looks like a man with a top knot in profile. The older characters look way less polished, however. Some say that the head shown is not a human head at all, but rather that of an ape or monkey, which kinda makes the character evolution chart look like the March of Progress. 次 other, next, after, lesser, times. From to, which crazily enough is also phonetic, and 欠 to sigh. I like to think of 次 as a drawing of someone heaving a heavy sigh after only scoring next best in the imperial examinations. Broadened to also mean after, lesser, and times, as in 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. 见 see, look, meet. A drawing of a man with the eye writ large, underscoring the meaning of looking or seeing. And like in English, in classical Chinese, to see someone can also mean to meet someone. 闻 to hear, to listen. From 门 a door, giving the reading, and ear. Pressing one's ear against a closed door to hear or to listen. Nerd note! The sharp-eyed among you will already have spotted that the earliest shapes have a marked lack of doors. So what's up with that? In truth, the oracle bone and bronze inscription shapes are drawings of a man holding up one hand to their ear as if listening for something. The 3 dots that we see in the bronzeware shape may be indicating the sound that is being heard. The Chu bamboo scroll characters brooks another sound element, hun, meaning dusk or twilight. No, not that one. Okay, that's better. I bring this up since not only were wen, hun, and hun ancient homophones, but there's a cultural link here too. From as early on as the Bronze Age, it was customary for a bride to arrive to her new home after sunset. That way, she would wake up the next day in her new forever home, symbolically being reborn into her husband's family. This meant that the groom's family would often be sitting in the dark, listening for the sound of the bride procession. And so that's the link between the words to listen, dusk, and marriage. Pretty neat, huh? Anyways, wen is also closely akin to wen, which means to ask, but has a mouth radical instead of an ear radical. 见闻 can be read either separately as seeing and hearing, or together as knowledge or been-throughness or experience. 某 some, so and so. From 甘 sweet over 木 tree, a tree with sweet ovest, the plum tree and its yield. 某 was later borrowed for the pronoun 某, meaning some or so and so. The meaning plum and plum tree is now written like this and is read as mei in Mandarin. 数 to tell, to reckon. From 楼 meaning again and again or often, and 扑 which means to strike. 扑 is often tacked onto any character to mark a word as a deed word or a verb. To hit something again and again, to tell, to reckon. 楼 also gives the reading. Another character with 2 readings, and in today's text it's read as 数 in the 4th tone, meaning number, tale, or rhyme. 识 to know. From 言 to speak, speech, and 知 which gives the sound. Someone who knows how to talk good. Nerd note! As a character of its own, 知 was out of book even in the classical era, but once meant sharpened wooden pole or wooden stake. This is a nigh forgotten remnant of the ancient Chinese vampire wars, when you had to know where on the bloodsucker's chest to poke with the pointy end. In modern Mandarin, 识 is only seen together with other characters, but in other Chinese languages like Cantonese, it is still brooked on its own. 文 outline, drawing, writing, learning, law, having or being couth. A drawing of a man with a kick-ass chest tattoo, from way back when tattoos were still hip and cool in Chinese culture, and not seen as a form of punishment. The character Wen has seen more development than most movie characters put out by modern Hollywood. At first it meant outline, drawing, then writing as a whole. Through writing we get learning, and like Confucius liked to harp on about, through learning one is made couth. E1. A breathwise stroke, meaning 1. 2 strokes is 2, and 3 strokes means 3. It gets less straightforward from there on, but we'll go over the tails and rhymes more closely in the staffcraft. And, then, yet, but, nevertheless. A drawing of a beard, bringing to mind those fake beards you see in Peking opera. It was borrowed for the same louding conjunction, meaning and, then, yet, but, nevertheless. In older texts, is also another way to write the second person pronoun singular, thou. The meaning beard is largely out of book, but when needed, 3 extra hairs are added to the character to set it apart from the grammatical particle. 10. From the character 1, E written top to bottom. Later, a breathwise stroke was tacked on to make it stand out more. That it looks similar to the Roman number 10 is pure happenstance. 100, 100, 100. From E1 as in 100 over bo, giving the sound. Nerd note! I can already hear the typing in the comments, so let's talk about the pachyderm in the boudoir. Yes, the mainstream reading in modern Mandarin are bai for 100 and bai for white. However, this is classical Chinese, not modern Mandarin, and classical Chinese has a few unique rules when it comes to how characters are read. The so-called wendu or bookish reading set against the lowbrow or baidu manner. Why? To flex on the lowborn, of course. The bookish reading is based on the Nanking dialect of Mandarin, which is what the lettered imperial elite spoke during the Ming and Qing dynasties. Only at the end of the Qing dynasty did the Peking dialect start to become mainstream. And don't you think for a second that this only holds true for reading classical Chinese in Mandarin. Most, if not all, Chinese tongues have characters that are read one way in everyday speech, but another when reading classics and poems. 千, 1000, 1000, 1000. Same as bo above, from E1 as in 1000, and ren, which gives the sound. 1. 10,000. A drawing of a stingtail borrowed for 10,000. The old meaning stingtail is now written with hui, a snake or adder, tacked on at the bottom, and is read as chai. The shorthand for 1 has been brooked ever since around 200 AD, making it one of the oldest simplified characters. San, 3. From 3 breathwise strokes, standing for the tail 3. Note that in some settings, 3 is also brooked to mean many, or again and again. In the Warring States, the 3 strokes were often written as 3 rings, a shorthand of the same sounding character san, whence came the later large writ form of san we see on Chinese banknotes. Cai, skill, cunning, gift. A drawing, but of what is still up in the air. Some say it's a wooden stake, others that it is a peg, others say it's the handle of a polearm. Xu Shen saw a seedling or a shoot growing out of the ground. Whatever the character showed at the start, it was borrowed to write the word cai, skill, cunning or gift, as in someone gifted. Zhe, the agentive suffix, as well as a topic marker. A drawing of a sugar cane over ko, mouth, or gan, sweet. The earliest meaning was sugarcane, but zhe was borrowed early on to write both the agentive suffix and topic marker zhe, both of which we'll go over in the grammar. The word sugarcane is now read as zhe and is written as cao, grass, over shu, many. Tian, heaven, sky. A drawing of a man with a line overhead, marking the sky. As in Western cultures, Tian is not simply the sky, but also heaven in a spiritual and moral sense. Di, earth, ground. The earliest shape is made up of fu, hill or cliff, shi, swine or boar, and tu, soil. That is, the 3 things that made up the whole earth in the old Chinese mind. From the rolling hills and tall mountains, to the life-giving soil, and the wild beasts roaming the land. From the Warring States onward, the character was written as only from tu, soil, and ye, which gives the reading. Guang, light, bright, shine. From huo, fire, over a drawing of a man kneeling, someone whose face is lit up by the light of a fire. Thus, light, bright, and shine. Ri, sun, day. A drawing of the sun with a dot in the middle. What does the dot stand for? Some say that it stands for Jinwu, the golden three-legged sun crow. Others say that it's irrefutable proof that the Bronze Age Chinese knew about sunspots. I think it's more likely that the dot is there to set Ri, sun, apart from the same looking character, Kou, mouth. Yue, moon, month. A drawing of the new moon. The line in the middle is there to set it apart from Xi, meaning night, which is also a drawing of a moonsicle. The moon's answer to the sun crow is the jade rabbit in the moon, or the three-legged moon toad, hinging on how one looks at the moon spots. Xing, star, stars, also wandering star. A drawing of a pair of small rings standing for the little shiny dots in the night sky. Sheng gives the reading. Later, the dots were changed to Ri, sun. Gang, head rope, key link, guiding principle, and outline. From Si, silk, that is a rope, and Gang, the ridge of a hill. The earliest meaning was head rope, the main rope of a fishing net, which looks kind of like a ridge. The meaning was broadened to key link, guiding principle, and outline. Jun, lord, king, Drighten, ruler. From Yin, which shows a hand holding a big stick, and Kou, mouth. The hand holding a stick stands for kingly might, and the mouth stands for kingly behest. Kinda makes one think of Roosevelt's words, speak softly and carry a big stick. Chen, thrall, thane, minister, ambiter. A drawing of an eye, mu, but swerved 90 degrees, an eye looking down meekly. Like the English words minister, thane, and ambite, Chen at the earliest meant thrall or servant. Lindqvist called Chen the bowing eye, the thane who oversees the lowborn on behalf of the king and later emperor. Fu, grown man, husband. From da, meaning big, but here standing for an adult man, and an extra stroke on top standing for a hairpin, a man with his hair put in a top knot fastened by a pin. At first, Fu meant grown man, later broadened to also mean husband. Nerd note! For thousands of years, Chinese men would put their hair up in top knots fastened by a hairpin, and this hairstyle became a marker of being a grown-up. This hairstyle was banned by the Qing, who instead strong-armed their Han underlings to do their hair in the way of their new Manchu overlords. Sadly, the old style didn't come back after the fall of the Qing, and instead the Chinese now do their hair in the Western fashion, like everyone else. Fu, wife, woman. From nu, woman, and zhou, broom. The broom here stands for the wife's plight of running the household. It also shows the reading. Nerd note! Both nu and fu mean woman, but nu can be either a girl or a grown woman, while fu only means grown-up woman, as well as wife. Classical texts hardly ever brook nu to mean woman, but mostly for the second-person pronoun thou. Woman is sometimes also written as furen. We can liken fu and furen to the English words wife and woman. Wife at one point meant both adult female human being and married woman, while the word woman is wife with man tacked on at the end, or wife person. Funny how sometimes Chinese and English speakers have exactly the same train of thought. Shun, to follow, to go along with. From chuan, river, and ye, head. To be like the river, to go with the flow, to follow. Chuan also gives the reading. Last time we learned the pattern xian ho, brooked when one deed follows another. Another way to list things in this manner is with shou and ci, to wit, shou xue wen, ci xi li. First learn the letters, then practice the rites. Unlike xian and ho, however, we can stack as many ci after each other as needed, or until you start feeling ashamed of yourself. Like the following. Shou xiao qin, ci ti zhang, 次学文次识数 First be filial to your parents, then respectful to your elders, then learn to read, then learn to reckon. Mo is a nifty little word that stands for anything or anyone unknown, an unknown unknown, and can be oversat into English as so-and-so, such and such, what's-his-face, and anything in between. We often see it brooked when someone's name is unknown or unimportant to the context, to wit, 某人问礼于孟子. You will call to mind that 问 means to ask, so the sentence reads, someone asked Mengzi about the rituals. We can also brook 某 about unknown time, like so, 某年某月某日某生. 年 means year, same as 岁, which we learned last lesson. In the year so-and-so, in such and such month, on the day of such and such, so-and-so was born. This actually sounds like a great opening for a classical Chinese parody novel. And of course, if you want to fill out the information, you just replace 某 with the information that would go there instead. Lastly, 某 is also used as a meek and lowly form of I, somewhat like English one, to wit, 某闻习道之人俱过柏林. One has heard that those who practice the Tao all live beyond 100 years. Is another noteworthy particle with a great many sides to it. However, its main note is to link verbs and verb phrases. In English, we brook the word and whether we are talking nouns, verbs, or adjectives. Sun and moon, walk and talk, red and blue. In classical Chinese, however, there are sundry words for and, based on what kind of words we're linking. When linking verbs, stative verbs, and verb phrases, our go-to wordling is to wit, 学而时习之, to learn and practice what one has learned in a timely manner, which is another well-known quote from the Analects. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? Well, yes and no, since classical Chinese never gives it to you straight. What I mean is that, while links deed words and deed sayings, that is, verb phrases, we, as always, must look at the setting to know what sort of link we're looking at. Let's read another quote from the Analects. 其为人也孝悌 而好犯上者先矣. Here, marks a contrast between the first half of the saying and the other. So instead of and, we might overset it as yet, or but, or nevertheless. Those who are filial and show brotherly duty, yet are fain to rise up against those above them, are few indeed. So, not only links deed words, but also marks contrast. First thing A happens, but then, or despite of this, or nevertheless, thing B also happens. Furthermore, it can also mark a string or chain of things happening after each other, in which sake we should read it as and then, which is how it is wielded in the text. 一而十，十而博，博而千，千而万. Once again, the bare-bones sentence of the TCC might throw us off here. We can think of 一而十 as a shortened down form of 闻一而知十, hear one and know 10, which means to first understand the gist of something, and from there deepening your knowledge little by little. As such, we can read this sentence as first understand 1, and then you will know 10. Once you've understood 10, then you can know 1,000. When you understand 1,000, then you can know 10,000. So that's at least 3 ways that we can brook and I'm doing my best to make this as easy as I can, but I can also see how this might be a lot to take in. I am a strong believer in learning from bispells, and the more you see a word brooked, the better you understand it. So let's have a look at a few more sayings with Note that most of these can be read in sundry ways, so when you're reading longer texts, keep the background and setting in mind when settling on how to best overset it. 见而知之, to see or to know it. We have no backdrop for this saying whatsoever, but we can read it as to see and then know it, or maybe to know something when one sees it. 近而亲, to be close or to be intimate. This is a slightly tricky one, because we have two deed words that mean nearly the same. And so here, is wielded not to mark contrast, but emphasis, to be close and intimate, very close, thick as thieves, and so on. 少 好学. To be young, to like, to learn. Let's think about this one for a wee bit. Is this someone who, though young, still likes learning? That is, to be young yet fond of learning? Or is this a simple statement, young and liking to study? 少学老成. To be young, to study, to be old, to become successful. Again, we would need more background here, but we can still read this as either if you study while you're young, you will then become successful later in life. Or maybe even if you study hard in your youth, you'll only see the results when you're older. And one more for the road. 孝与亲而忠于君. Zhong means truth and trueness, as well as being true, being steadfast, truthful, true-hearted, and so on. So the saying reads, to be filial to one's parents, to be true to one's lord. Once more, this saying can be read many ways, and only the setting in which we see it would help settle which reading is more or less right. But here are a few choices. Be filial to your parents and only then loyal to your king. That is, only when you've fulfilled all your duties at home should you worry about your duties to your boss or to your country. Be filial to your parents, but true to your lord. Filial piety is for your parents, and loyalty is for your superiors, implying that loyalty to your parents or filial piety to your king is unnatural. Meaning that you shouldn't be treating your mom and dad the same as you would your king, but you also wouldn't treat your king the same as your mom and dad. I think our good friend Master Kung might have a few things to say about that reading. Lastly, be filial to your parents and truthful to your king. That is, filial piety and loyalty are both equally important, and you shouldn't neglect one for the other. Hopefully you all now have a better idea how this particle works, as well as how flexible it can be. I've even read one grammar that said it might be easiest to think of like an outspoken comma, like how who is an outspoken question mark. That same writer went on to say that the best way to overset into English is to straight up write a comma. I myself think that's going a bit overboard, but I'll put it out there for anyone who wants to give it a go. Before moving on, is one of the top 10 most oft seen 虚字, or empty words, that is, particles, and has quite a few more uses beyond the ones we went over today. But I think we'll keep those for another time. Classical Chinese, like modern Chinese, is quite straightforward when it comes to tails and rhymes. The ones you'll see most often are 1, 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 100, 10,000, and 1, 10,000. The layout for brooking these couldn't be easier. 15 is 15, 10, 5, 20 is 20, 210, 30 is 30, 310, and so on. Now, in modern Mandarin, we do not put one i in front of 10, unless it's a deal of a larger tail, like 213, 200, 1, 10, 3, or 213. However, in classical Chinese writings, you may run into tails where we leave out the 1 in front of 100 or 1,000 as well, like in the following: 50, 100, 5, 10, or 150, 1800, 1,000, 800, or 1,800. Other times, you will see the tails written out with autistic attention to detail, like 210, 200, 110, or 210. Another thing that sets classical Chinese apart from modern Mandarin is that in modern Mandarin we might shorten 120 to yi by r, leaving out the 10 at the end. However, older classical texts will tend to keep the last 10, but as we saw earlier, might leave out the 1, so that we instead get 220. Besides that, you can pretty much mix and match them freely, to wit: 45, 410, 45, 520, 520, 520. Also note that unlike English, 1 10,000 is its own tale, so 100,000 is not 10,000, but instead is 10,000, 10,000, and 1 million is 100,000, 110,000. Lastly, and to what I will presume the great delight of many a Loremaster who is already well versed in modern Chinese, Japanese, or even Vietnamese, is that classical Chinese does not have classifiers or measure words. At least, not to the extent we see today. We still see measure words for actual measurements, like length and weight, but none of that one measure word book, two measure word flower nonsense. So then, how do we write, say, 1,000 men? We write 千人. That's so easy it almost doesn't feel right. Our last grammar point for today is 着, which is mainly booked in one of two ways, as an agentive suffix, one who does something, and as a topic marker. As an agentive suffix, 着 is the same as the English suffix 儿, meaning one who does something, as in swimmer, writer, reader, runner, and so on. Also like in English, 着 gets tacked on after the verb or stative verb, with an optional object in between, to wit, 学者, a learner, a student, 知者, one who knows, someone wise, 善学问者, one who is good at learning, a scholar or bookworm, 识数者, someone who knows numbers, someone who knows math. We can even tack 着 on at the end of entire verbal sentences, like so, 不善学而能识数者少也. Few indeed are those who are bad at learning but knows math. Here, the entire bit before 着 is nominalized, turned into a noun phrase by tacking on 着 at the end. In this way, 着 is much the same as 知人 when we're talking about people. However, 着 can be booked much broader than 知人, which brings us to the next point, 着 as a topic marker. 着 as a topic marker comes from its brooking as an agentive, but instead of marking the one who does the thing, it now marks the thing we're talking about. In this way, 着 is much like the Japanese wa and is often seen together with ye in the layout you see here, which means A is B. So let's have a gander at a few bispells, shall we? 礼义者，人所当学也. Rites and ceremony are what men ought to learn. Here, 着 marks 礼仪, rites and ceremony as the topic. Not only does this help us set the topic and comment halves of a sentence apart, but we can also brook 着 to underscore something, to wit, 昔者孔子问礼于老子. Once upon a time, Master Kung asked the old master about the rites. A slightly wended quote from 史记, record of the Grand Historian. Here, 着 underscores that the happenings in question take place in the past, 昔. Going back to our text, you will note that it leaves out the 也 at the end. So, 三才者天地人 should be read as 三才者天地人也. But of course, if it was left in, then it wouldn't be called the three-character classic, now would it? 着 can also be left out if the writer feels that the topic is clear enough. And sometimes both 着 and ye are left out, and you're left sitting there, staring at the text, questioning your life choices. Anyways, since English doesn't have any topic markers of its own, you don't need to fret over oversetting topic marker 着, but you do need to understand what it is doing there in the first place. And that's the grammar over and done with, but we do have a few cultural notes here as well, so let's dig right into it. So, what are the three skills, the three lights, and the three key links anyways? Well, I'm glad you asked. The Chinese love to group things together and give them nifty little names like the three skills, heaven, earth, man, the four fair ones, Xi Shi, Wang Zhaojun, Diao Chan, and Yang Yuhuan, also known as Yang Guifei, the five phases, wood, fire, earth, metal, water, the five grains, rice, wheat, foxtail millet, broomcorn millet, and soybean, the seven emotions, joy, anger, sadness, fear, love, hate, desire, and so on. This practice continues to the modern day, with terms like the four olds, old ideas, old culture, old customs, and old habits, the four pests, rats, flies, mosquitoes, and sparrows, the three represents, the 10 definites, and so on and so forth. In short, there is a buttload of these things, and while we'll run into a few of these throughout the TCC, we'll only be scratching the very surface. Today I'll start you off softly with only 3 of them, each of which is a group of 3, so in the spirit of things, we might call them the 3 threes. Say, this is pretty fun, isn't it? But enough of my waffling, let's start off with Sancai, the 3 skills. The 3 skills can be found in the I Ching, the Book of Changes, one of the oldest and weightiest of the Chinese classics, and they are as follows: the way of heaven, Tian Dao, the way of earth, Di Dao, and the way of man, Ren Dao. Okay, cool, but that doesn't really tell us much, does it? Lucky for us, we have some footnotes, said to be written by Master Kung himself, to clear things up. The way of heaven is dark and light, Yin Yang. The way of earth is soft and hard, Rou Gang. And the way of man is righteousness and kindness, Yi Ren. Now, I'm sure this made sense 2000 years ago, but I think today's reader might need a little bit more meat on them there bones. So let's rip a page from Zhuangzhou's book and get into the grit and grime of it all. The key is in the name, the 3 skills. That is, these were things you ought to know as a well-read and well-rounded Chinese gentleman at the time. The way of heaven is dark and light, that is, knowing the sky and the year tides. These were all weighty things when overseeing farm work, knowing when to sow and when to reap, when livestock would give birth, and when they were fit for slaughter. But also to keep an eye on good and bad signs in the sky, like comets, timely snowfall, and so on. In short, the old Chinese, like many farming civilizations, had starcraft and calendar making down to both an art and a science. Next is the way of earth, which is soft and hard, or in today's terms, geography as well as geology. Where is the soil fit for farming and raising livestock? Where is it hard and barren? Where to find ores, jade and other gemstones? How to build dikes and dams to fight off flooding and drought? Where to build new towns and boroughs, and so on. Now, many of you may think that feng shui is something that bored white women do when they feel that astrology is somehow a little bit too mainstream. However, much of feng shui is in truth founded on hundreds if not thousands of years of Chinese wisdom about how to use the land. And while the Romans get most of the limelight for stunning feats of craftsmanship, the Chinese were no slouches in this field either. Last but not least, the way of man are righteousness and kindness. And this one really has Confucius' fingerprints all over it, doesn't it? In other words, how to weigh the letter of the law against the spirit of the law, when to be strict and when to be merciful, and so on. If we go a bit deeper, the 3 skills can be seen as a handy roadmap for self-betterment. Know when to be outgoing and doughty, Yang, and when to be still and idle, Yin. Know when to stand firm, Gang, and when to yield, Rou. Know how to be both fair, Yi, and kind, Ren. Of course, we can take this even further, but I think you get the idea. So next up, let's pull out our spyglasses and have a gander at the 3 lights. The 3 lights are first named in the Bohu Tong, a text from the Han Dynasty, although the idea seems to be much older. 天有三光, 日, 月, 星. The sky has 3 lights, the sun, the moon, and the stars. Like we saw in the 3 skills, starcraft was one of the weightiest skills to have in old China. Sadly, these days the Koreans have them beat. So it should come as no shock that the 3 lights get their own little headline. In short, where the sun sits in the sky marks days and years. The moon marks the months, but is also the basis for the lunar calendar. And the stars, well, the stars keep track of many things. The word xing means both fixed stars as well as the 5 wandering stars, that is, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. In other words, the ones that can be seen from Earth without a spyglass. Of these, Jupiter was the weightiest, since it kept track of the 12-year cycle, which is why it was also called the year star, as we saw way back in episode 5. The 5 wandering stars are also linked with the 5 phases, and like in Western StarCraft, Their whereabouts in the sky were said to shape the everyday lives of those on Earth. Chinese StarCraft isn't as popular in the West as Feng Shui is, but it's still pretty popular among Chinese and the Chinese diaspora, and is by no means any less elaborate than the Western stuff. On a historical note, Western missionaries were greatly welcomed into the Ming and Qing courts, because their knowledge of mathematics and StarCraft were more precise than the Chinese at the time, and so their skills were highly sought after. Sadly, they kind of mucked it up later on with the whole Chinese rights controversy, but that's a story for another time. For now, we'll wend our eyes back to the world of man and the Sangang, the 3 key links. The 3 key links. Also called the 3 principles or 3 relationships, these are the 3 bonds that tied folks together in feudal society: ruler and underling, father and son, husband and wife. We first see the 3 key links not in a Confucian text but in a legalist one, namely the Han Fei Zi. 臣是君，子是父，妻是夫，三者顺，天下治，三者逆，天下乱. Or in English, the minister waits upon their lord, the son waits upon his father, and the wife waits upon her husband. When these 3 are followed, the world is neat and tidy, but if these 3 are overturned, the world becomes a bloody mess. 100 years later, the Han Loremaster, Dong Zhongshu, who pushed Confucianism as state teaching, worked the 3 key links into his writings, with a Confucian spin, of course. While Han Fei's idea was stiff and laddered, Dong Zhongshu softened the sharpest edges into a system of shared, but not even worth, trust and plight. Thus, we get Jun Chen Yi, between lord and thane, righteousness. The lord should hold his underlings in high worth, treating them fairly and well, and in turn the underling should heed and stay true to their lord. Fu Zi Qin, between father and son, closeness. A father should love and care for his son, and in turn the son should hold his father highly and do as he's told. Fu Fu Shun, between husband and wife, agreement. The husband should take care of his wife, and the wife should follow her husband's lead. Grasping these ideas will help you better understand not only classical Chinese works, but to a degree, today's Chinese culture as well. I hope you can now see why the Chinese love their lists so much. They're like Russian nesting dolls of knowledge and wisdom, helpful for teacher and learner alike. The learner has an easy time keeping them in mind, and the teacher can stepwise deepen the learner's knowledge in a structured way. If you call to mind, this was also foreshadowed by the line 一而十，十而博，博而千，千而万, which gives us a stepwise guideline how to deepen and broaden our learning, from the bare bones, to the meat and potatoes, to the jam and gravy at the end. I might have been a bit peckish when writing this bit, and since each one of these lists carry a lot of cultural baggage with them, in writing you can simply name drop them and know that anyone reading will understand the deeper meaning, allowing you to keep going with less ink spilled. Handy and thrifty. But I think that's quite enough of me prattling for today, so let's wrap this up. I won't give you any oversetting homework today because, frankly, there isn't much to overset. Instead, let's switch things up a little and test how much you've all grasped by now. Write 3 sentences in classical Chinese down in the comment, and we'll go over them in the next episode. Remember to like, share and subscribe to feed the hungry algorithm, and a big, massive shout out to the honorable members of the Chinese Merchant Guild who help fund these terrible videos. Last but not least, thank you, all of you, for watching this video. You're all truly wonderful. Until next time, scholars.